Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Executive Scrutiny Board of Derby City Council on the 7th of October. It's 6 p.m. here in the Council Chamber. Item 1 on the agenda is the apologies. Any apologies, Stephen? Councillor Bonser. Anybody else? No. Late items? Nope. There are no late items tonight. Declarations of interest. Have anything on the agenda, ladies and gentlemen? No. Minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of September. Anybody else propose those? Anybody second them? Councillor Bolton. Okay. Minutes of the meeting held on. I've done that. Forward plan then. Item 5 is the forward plan. Anything everybody wants to pick up on what's on or not on the agenda of the forward plan? Yes, Councillor Moorhall.
Cheers, Chair. Thank you very much. So last time we were here, Project Assemble had been taken out of the forward plan, and no one seems to be able to answer why it's been taken out. Project Assemble. Oh, I thought you said Scandal. No. Well, maybe it might turn into Project Scandal. Who knows? Freudian slip there. No, not at all. No. I've lost my train of thought now. No, I'm back to the point. Right. So no one seemed to be able to articulate or explain why it's been taken out of the forward plan. And I just noticed that it's still not in the forward plan, or whatever it might be turning into is not there for us to be able to scrutinise. So I'm just wondering if anybody knows why it's still not in there, or why it was taken out in the first place, or what on earth is going on, basically.
Stephen, did we get any response from any officers present as to what had happened to it or where it was? Yes.
Chair, there was a training of one of the council's training events a few weeks back was given over to the Assembly Rooms project, which was quite informative. And I think the Regen Scrutiny Board is on their agenda for tomorrow evening. So that's about as much as I can help with, I'm afraid.
Yes, Councillor Kerr.
I also attended that briefing, and it does, to me, suggest that there is going to need to be a decision taken by the Cabinet before that can go ahead. And it's clearly progressing because of the briefing we went to. So it is surprising that it isn't on the forward plan. And we've got 3 items tonight which appeared on the forward plan in September and are going to Cabinet on Wednesday. And some of those could certainly have been in the forward plan beforehand, earlier. So it's again that question about why are we getting such short notice about things coming into and then leaving the whole forward plan process, because it doesn't give the other scrutiny boards a chance to pull things in without having a special meeting or discussion or something, because of the timing and the short notice that's being given. It's not enabling good scrutiny within the authority, in my view.
No, this is why I, at the beginning of last year and this year, pressed for timeliness on the forward plan and on reports and papers that come to exec scrutiny and to Cabinet as well, because appreciate the officers' pressures in getting the reports ready, but if we're to do meaningful consultation and scrutiny of reports, then they need to get better. At least if I wasn't at the training, I'm at Regen tomorrow night. At least this time they haven't tried to, because there certainly will need to be Cabinet decisions in relation to what happens on the marketplace in the immediate future, if there hasn't been already. Well, there hasn't been already formally, but at least they're not badging the last time they badged the Guildhall under Project Assemble. I hope they don't try and badge whatever is going to happen on the marketplace under the same title, because Project Assemble is no longer, it clearly no longer resembles what was originally suggested. So if nobody's got an explanation for us, Stephen, we will ask at Regen Scrutiny tomorrow night, but if we don't get an answer, then perhaps you can get one for us.
Yeah, I think that would be the so update on marketplace regeneration due to be considered tomorrow evening. So that'll be opportunity for the relevant scrutiny board to consider that, and depending on what the outcome of that is, obviously with the forward plan, ultimately you're looking at what is, I know the points that Councillor Kerr is making about the forward plan, but ultimately will be the key decisions that are going to be taken within 28 days of the publication of that document. But maybe, Chair, we'll see if you can get in contact with me after tomorrow night.
Yep, I'll do that. I'll do that, certainly. Councillor Kerr, do you know off the top of the head the 3 new forward plan items?
On page 3, there's a list of the new items, and I believe that we are noting the Cabinet is noting the consultation responses in respect of proposed Article 4 direction on Wednesday, that the Enterprise Growth Fund update, and there's actually a decision to be taken there as well, is Wednesday, and Derby Libraries Community Managed Libraries Delivery is Wednesday. So those 3, 7.24, 8.24 and 9.24, have come in at this meeting and are going out on Wednesday.
And clearly there's been work ongoing on those for some time, which should have necessitated or brought about an entry on the forward plan. Okay. Do we need as a committee to reinforce the need for timely entries in the forward plan as a recommendation from us, do you think?
I don't know, Chair, who would be the best person to highlight this to, and if nobody else, it might be our Chief Executive who needs to be doing this, because it should help both the Executive and the rest of the operation of the Council. I think it should be in his interest to make sure that our scrutiny process can work as best it can.
Okay, well I think probably it's my role as Chair of Exec Scrutiny to highlight it to them, and I'll ensure that I do that probably both in writing and at the meeting on Wednesday. Okay. Yes, please. The Chair resolved to highlight the issues with Cabinet both in writing and personally. Okay. Good. Moving on then. Council Cabinet responses to scrutiny recommendations. And again, we talked about this last time, and the number of occasions on which we make cross-party recommendations to Cabinet and the responses that we get from them in relation to the recommendations. And I was just talking with the officer here in relation to that, and we have a spreadsheet on the response to the recommendations from Exec Scrutiny, which we'll probably bring to the next meeting.
Yep, Chair, I was just going to, if you want me to attach that to report as Appendix 2.
He's got his mic on, so he's talking generally.
So the report attached to Appendix 1 of the minutes of the last Cabinet meeting with the highlighted recs and responses. But if the committee wants me to, I can attach the spreadsheet that keeps a log of each meeting and the responses.
Yes, if you would. I think
just keeps a tally. It keeps a tally.
I think it'd be of interest because I think on this occasion, from memory, they noted 1 or 2, accepted 1, and refused 1. So in terms of recommendations, they're doing about what is the average of a third of the recommendations we make are acted on positively by Cabinet. And I don't think that's good enough, but we need to monitor it, to raise it and improve it in the future. Okay. Any other points in relation to Cabinet responses? No? Okay. That moves us on to straight on to item 7 and the cabinet agenda. Okay. Bear with me a second while I bring it up. So we've got the normal items, initial items, and they normally deal with any recommendations from us in the course of their deliberations. And so the first item is item 8, compulsory acquisition of empty homes, which I suspect is why Ian's with us.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, members will be familiar with this report. We bring one of these up to yourselves every 2 or 3 times a year. The Council, as I know you all agree, considers empty homes to be a wasted resource, particularly when we're in the middle of a national and a local housing shortage. And as you know, empty homes can also cause problems for neighbouring properties and indeed neighbourhoods where they can become a blight. This report seeks authority for authorisation for CPOs, compulsory purchase orders, for 8 properties, and all of these properties have been empty for at least 2 years, and some of them have been empty for 7 or 8 years. From previous experience, it's likely that less than half of these properties will actually go all the way forward to be compulsory acquired. We normally find that just having a cabinet authorisation to seek that is enough to persuade the owners to bring these properties back into use or indeed get them sold. Where we do end up acquiring a home, our first port of call is to consider whether that home can be used by the council for its own housing stock, although that isn't always possible, and in those cases the property will be sold on with a proviso that it must be brought back into use within a given time period. And the precise details of the 8 properties, Chair, are contained within the confidential part of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. It's been a little bit in the news lately, hasn't it? I think there was, because it's not just a local problem, it's a national issue, obviously. And I saw something, I can't remember the numbers, but there are multi-thousands of properties around the country which have stood unused and empty for so long. One thing that struck me in what you just said is some of them have been empty for 7 to 8 years. Is there any way we can quicken them? How quickly we get hold of them? I know there are problems, complex legal ownership problems and difficulties in identifying things, but being empty for 7 or 8 years is a long time.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Clearly there's a staff and resource issue that comes into play there, but sometimes properties just don't come to our attention until they've been empty for a considerable period of time. Almost all these properties will have been subject to a complaint from a neighbour or a ward councillor, but it's often until those complaints come through that we actually pick up that they are empty. So there is sometimes a natural delay before a complaint comes forward. I think the one positive thing that I can say is I've been presenting these reports for a number of years now, Chair, and I can't recall introducing reports where we are dealing with properties that have been empty for as little as 2 years in the past. So in the past, it's always been 4, 5, 6 years and much longer. To me, the fact that I am talking to you about a property that's been empty just for 2 years is a sign that we're moving in the right direction, Chair. Thank you.
Right, yeah. I'm not sure how sensible a campaign to report long-term empty houses might work out, because it might create a bit of a rush for us, do you think? Excuse us, we're just checking some technical issues. Might be with this microphone. Any questions for Ian, any thoughts? Yes, Councillor Rawson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's very welcome to see 8 properties come forward this evening. in the current circumstances where we are so short of housing. So hopefully, hopefully one way or another these will come back into use. My question's about those where we've got council tax arrears, some quite considerable amounts. Are we able to legally take that off the market price that we pay for them, in terms of making sure that we recover that in making the payments? And for those properties that perhaps don't go all the way through to compulsory purchase, do we make sure that we receive the council tax arrears before we lift the risk of compulsory purchase? Thank you.
Good question, Martin. Ian, is that not another red flag in terms of empty properties when council tax arrears are rising?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It is, and you're right, we do work with council tax colleagues, and if considerable arrears do build up, that can be a red flag that we do pick up on. But of course, not always are the council tax in arrears. Sometimes they can continue to pay them, and therefore we aren't made aware of them. In relation to Councillor's question, yes, we will. So if there's council tax arrears, we will take that off before we pay the owner the final amount of the settlement. And indeed, if there are council tax arrears that are reasonably significant, that does speed up the legal process that we can go through, because then if we have to go through the normal, slightly slower paced CPO process.
Councillor Kerr?
Thank you. Two questions. The first relates to paragraph 4.3 on page 2, where it comments that in line with the national trend, the number of empty homes across the city is increasing slightly. And I'm really supportive of this scheme, and I just wondered why the numbers were going up. Do we have any feeling back from?
It is just anecdotal, Chair. Obviously, the economic climate will come into play here. Clearly, if there's a booming housing market, then owners have a natural financial incentive to get their homes into use more quickly, because there's a financial incentive. And I think a reduction in local authority resources generally across the country means that empty homes teams, because they're not a statutory function of the local authorities, I think we can see teams being reduced in number, Chair, in local authorities across the council. So there's just less of that empty homes activity going on.
Thank you. That makes sense. And the second thing I just wanted to highlight is actually the climate change roundel. And this isn't something that is just your section that is getting these wrong, in my view. I think we do some more training on this, because if we actually leave these empty properties empty, they are probably going to be using virtually no electricity, no gas. Their carbon footprint is going to be close to zero. As soon as we refurbish them and get them moving forward, they're going to have somebody living in them who's going to be using energy. And so actually, and the work to do that is going to have a carbon footprint, because it's going to be buying materials, it's going to be painting, it's going to be renovating. So the buildings may be going to be improved, but it's actually going to produce carbon in doing the improvements. And once we've improved them, they're going to be producing energy. So they're actually not greens on this roundel, but they should be saying our carbon footprint is going to increase. It's absolutely the right thing to do. We can't stand still and not do this work, but it shouldn't be saying this is actually going to reduce carbon by doing this work.
I get your point, Councillor Kerr, but I think the benefits of bringing 8 properties back into use far outweigh the problem in relation to...
I completely agree with you, but in terms of our carbon footprint, it's likely to go up as a result.
Something to bear in mind on the next one. Okay, any other questions? No? All right, Ian, thank you very much. You've got to stay for the last bit. Okay, I'm sure you'll be fascinated by the rest of the meeting, so that's fine. Okay, moving on then, we're going to go to So it's Article 4. Yes, it is Article 4. Houses of multiple occupation. You can do that for us. Paul?
Thank you, Chair. Members will be familiar with this topic area. It went to Cabinet in January, and this report is seeking confirmation of making of that order, and it will come into effect on the 3rd of May next year. In the meantime, we've had to do the necessary public consultation. Over 500 site notices were put up across the city, and the consultation ran from the 2nd of April through to the 31st of May, and we had 246 responses, of which 6 were against the proposal. Those in objection were concerned about restricting the supply of housing unnecessarily, and there was a perception that the problems associated with HIMOs could be addressed in other ways. However, all those in support, and I've read all 246 letters, responses, all those in support of the direction related to better regulation, ensuring better quality housing options, better regulation of private landlords, and the ability to prevent some of the perceived issues with large concentrations. That's the planning input. The large concentrations of HIMOs result in antisocial behaviour, crime, parking impact on local services and community cohesion. So, what are we doing about it? We need to be able to assess through the planning process the impacts. And in the report, there is suggested policy, which I mentioned in this chamber before, about the proposal wouldn't lead to the creation of 3 or more adjacent HIMO properties. It wouldn't lead to a sandwiching of a residential property with 2 HIMOs either side, and it wouldn't lead to more than 10% of the properties within a 50-metre radius of the development site. So that's what we would use to assess any planning applications coming forward. And just an example, if you have a 50-metre radius in a terraced area, it brings in about 50 houses. So no more than 5 in that area could be HIMOs, which, if you look at the current concentrations we've got, we're well in excess of that, hence the problems we've been getting back from the consultation response. I'm being asked how we will assess those, so I need to take this guidance through council, through cabinet, and then finally through the local plan process. So it'll be a material consideration and be able to guide applicants as we go forward. The next steps will be after the consultation and after we've hopefully Cabinet have confirmed the direction. I need to give notice to the Secretary of State and to the public. This is what we're doing, and this is when it's going to come into effect, 3rd of May next year. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Paul. I think as councillors we must all have received inquiries about HIMOs. And some might say that, or question whether this actually goes far enough, but that will be determined by its success or otherwise, and whether or not, because we could be changed and varied at some later point, probably not without further consultation. No?
Through you, Chair, we would have to again look at, is there evidence to extend the initial area? Leicester are doing that now. They have an Article 4 direction on certain areas, and they had an influx of, primarily, I believe, student accommodation on the outside of those areas. So they're having to expand those areas with evidence. You need the evidence to generate the proposal and to support the proposal. So we'd have to do the whole exercise again, but the current one would still remain in place.
Shame we have to have a problem before we can fix it, but there you go. Any questions, comments on this? I think it's generally accepted as the right thing to do in terms of proper regulation. It's about whether the proposed measures are right. Councillor Kerr.
I agree that at this moment this is the right thing to do, and I think that embedding it in the local plan is, again, the right thing for us to be doing. And in some ways, starting this now before the local plan process, it actually gives us a bit of opportunity to experience it in practice and see what responses come back. But sort of trying to preempt that a little bit, in paragraph 4.7, it comments that it's impractical to give notice to all owners, occupiers and individuals. And I just wanted to double check that there isn't actually going to be any impact on current occupiers or current operators of HMOs.
Through you, Chair, there is not. It's not retrospective. So those existing ones would remain. I've been advising them what they can do if they wish to secure their provision is go through the planning established use certificate route to demonstrate you've got an established use there. But going forward, going forwards, we will people will need to make a planning application, which will come before planning committee or be determined accordingly against the policy provisions that we're hopefully setting out. Thank you, Chair.
That's useful. Thank you for that. And I think that established use thing is maybe it needs a bit more publicity in the right circles. The second point is on the policy, that this isn't a matter of sandwiching, but I haven't got a view here one way or the other, but if you've got a house that is at the end of a row, end of a street, it's not sandwiched against anything because it's the end of the loaf. But the one next to it could become an HMO. Is that felt to be acceptable when it's sandwiched between a road and an HMO, or the end of the road and an HMO? Was that considered by officers one way or the other, or is that something we ought to be clear about in our policy?
I think, Chair, once we have those policy bullet points in place, we can expand on that with a guidance note. It needs a guidance note to go with it. In the good old days, we'd call it a supplementary planning document, but the government are getting rid of those. That's why we have to do it through the local plan. But we can work that up with the planning committee on those particular instances, those particular nuances, with much more nuts and bolts of the detail.
I guess, Paul, in terms of taking experience of these guidelines, in exceptional circumstances, the decision-making powers of the planning committee are not fettered, are they, by this particular Article 4?
The Article 4 only means you need to make a planning application, and then it's up to the decision maker to determine that planning application. And the policies will be there as guidance.
Okay. Councillor Holmes?
Just a very quick one, Chair, technicality. Just so I'm understanding this, Paul, if I can ask you. On page 3, where it says where a new HMO is proposed, which will include 15 or more individuals, etc., it says brackets in line with policy XX. So is that the policy which will be created due to adoption of Article 4?
Through you, Chair. Yes, the policy, I don't know what the policy number is going to be or anything, so we've left that blank at the moment. If members and Cabinet are happy with the direction, this guidance going forwards, then we can establish that in the local plan, and then it becomes formal policy. At the moment, it would only be guidance that planning committee can weigh up, and prospective purchasers of houses can weigh up when they're thinking of creating a housing multiple occupation. It only becomes policy once it's enshrined in the local plan.
Okay, so can I take it that we resolve to note the report? Do we welcome it and note the report?
Chair, I'd definitely say we welcome it. It's something that many of us have felt for a long time that it needs to happen, and particularly those in wards where there's high concentrations, and those of us on planning committee have seen the issues that it creates. So I'd say I'd like to recommend that we very much welcome it.
Councillor Holmes?
It was also an element, Chair, of a review after a period of time. It's going to be very interesting to see what impacts it's had, what positives it's created, and potentially what negatives it may have created as well. So I think that's something which the relevant scrutiny or ourselves should look at in due course.
sounds entirely sensible to recommend a review after a certain period, Paul?
I just wrote down 12 months, but it might need longer. 24 months, 2 years to allow it to get in and bite.
Possibly a cursory look after 12 months. So a first review after 12 months. Claire, does that answer you?
I was also going to say I thought a review would be important, and it's probably something that the planning committee could do.
Okay, well, so we recommend.
Chair,
Yeah, I'm coming to you, Councillor Wright. So you got that so far? Yeah. Councillor Wright.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to say that I definitely endorse the report. Arboretum Ward is one of the many wards in this city that's been disproportionately affected by this type of housing. Thank you.
I think we have to recognise there is a need for HMOs at some point, and it does solve, well not solve, but it's an alternative to some of our housing problems. So, but they do need to be dealt with in a sensible fashion. Are you okay with that, Stephen? In terms of, we welcome it with a recommendation that it's reviewed initially after 12 months, maybe by the Planning Control Committee. Okay. We okay? Everybody all right with that? Good. Thank you, Paul. Moving on from there then moves us on to libraries. And a mystery Bob Gill to
It is. Thank you,
tell us about
Chair.
libraries.
Again, another subject I think most members will be familiar with. This is the issue of the 10 community libraries that, following the other review in 2017, were handed to Direct Help and Advice, DHA, but subsequently in 22 were handed back to the local authority to hold and look for alternative modes of delivery. The decision was taken that we would again look for a external partner to run these 10 libraries. And following that decision in February, delegated authority was given to the Strategic Director of Place to proceed with that process. Just to comment, Councillor Kerr, I think in terms of this report coming back late, it's because we're just seeking a clarification from the original delegated authority that was made back in February 2024. So following that, we have run an expression of interest exercise, 2 stages. One was an initial one to scope out potential bidders and providers, and those that passed that stage being invited to submit a full bid to take forward for consideration. As the report sets out, there were 10 that showed initial interest, but only 5 submitted the expression of interest stage 1. 3 of those withdrew from the other process, and we only had 2 who were willing to go the full hog. I think it's fair to say that of those 2, there is one clear bidder who has scored higher. We've done a robust scoring mechanism looking at a number of officers across the authority from specialisms in estates, communities and accountancy to consider all aspects of running these libraries into the other future and developing a sustainable service. And 4.18 sets out the main benefits of the preferred bidder, bidder C. The decision here now is to appoint that preferred bidder, and again further delegation of authority to the Strategic Director of Place to enter into the lease agreements and management agreements to progress delivery with a view that all of the 10 libraries will transfer by the end of March 2025. Additionally, within the other report, just to make it a complete report, we've also included the Section 106 funding that's been identified for Spondon Library for improvements to the IT and the fixtures and fittings within the building to tie in with the other renovations that are taking place with the external roof lining, roof components. Essentially, that is the decision that is being presented to Cabinet on Wednesday. And as I say, yeah, essentially appoint the preferred bidder. We will then progress with the heads of term management agreements and lease agreements and work with that provider to establish a trust to take the library service forward.
Thank you, Paul. I suspect you may be facing some queries shortly about the identity of bidder C, and particularly why that bidder's not named when the process has been completed, and the bidder C is way in streets ahead of, in terms of scoring, than the only other bidder. Nothing's going to change. If the recommendation is to appoint bidder C, then why is it that nobody knows who bidder C is?
Part of it was for the transparency within this. We, having taken advice on this, it was felt that naming the other two bidders added no value to the outcome of the assessments. They were purely based on the criteria that had been set out in 4.1.7. Once the decision to appoint is taken, then we will be announcing that who bidder C is. So effectively, as soon as Thursday, that can be disclosed. Currently, both bidder A and bidder C are unaware of the proposal. We've not communicated to them their scores or the outcome of the assessments. And again, that's part of the transparency. That should we need to negotiate further, that can then be done under both commercial sensitivity rules.
Okay, I'm going to open it up to committee to explore and expand on that inquiry, I think. Anybody else want to come in first? Councillor Kerr.
I was also interested to know who the person was, and I thought there might be a pink paper to accompany this one, but there wasn't. But no doubt we will know sooner or later. The other 2 points I had is that Sinfin Library has recently had a renewal of quite a lot of its furniture, and I believe the old furniture was successfully relocated to another user. So I very much hope that the experience that was gained in Sinfin can be used regarding Spondon's equipment, and that can be reused by a community organisation or somebody.
I thought then for a minute you were going to recommend that we got Sinfin's furniture in Spondon, but I might have had a word about that.
I haven't been to look at it. I don't know whether it's just what you want or whether you want something different in Spondon.
Okay, thank you.
But I just hope it can be reused. The other thing I was just going to raise is the climate roundel, which is half green in this case. And if the community libraries are going to continue to operate in a similar manner to they are now, which I presume it is with a little bit of extra, I am surprised that it is just entirely green with lots of positive there and no negative, because even the cost of the equipment that's going into Spondon will have its own carbon footprint. That is not recognised here. It just seems that we're not making these as meaningful as we might. It's a really right thing, Chair. It's absolutely the right thing to be doing. We need to keep those libraries open, but if we closed them, again, they would be producing less carbon.
Take your point, Councillor Kerr. Maybe in future, when you notice another inconsistency in the climate change assessment, it might be appropriate for, if you're thinking that we might come forward with a recommendation for more training or whatever you feel is appropriate to upskill people and get these assessments more accurate. So maybe it's something for you to think about in the future. Okay. Anybody else? Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm sure it comes as no surprise really to anybody that I've got some comments and questions on this particular item. Looking at the Spondon Library first, I think it's fantastic what we're doing there. I visited there a few times when I was the Cabinet member. A lot of things needed updating, a lot of things needed changing, and we've been in a not ideal situation for a while, so I'm very, very pleased to see that libraries being using. It's a good use of Section 106 funds. I'm not sure if there's Section 106 in any other budgets, but I hope that we can look at that other Section 106 as part of this transition and ensure that money is being spent. Turning to the sort of report in itself, looking at all 10 libraries, and I do welcome the fact we've got a report in front of us. I've been growing increasingly concerned we've gone quite a while without a report. We've been through, I think, 3 cabinet members since May that have had libraries in their portfolio. We've been through several officer changes as well, and that got my alarm bells ringing a bit around this, but we have now got a report in front of us, which I see as very positive. And to Pop and to all the other officers involved in this, I know how hard this is to be in your portfolio as an officer. It's a very tricky topic in its content. It's also a tricky political topic. I understand that entirely. I've got a number of general comments I want to make. I don't expect any answers to them other than the direct questions. I know it's a very tricky position for officers to be in on this particular topic, and I've seen that from before. So I think some of the bits in this are interesting. I think the fact that we're now, I think it was a change in the last report, but we're now looking at 10 CMLs, where in May last year we were looking at all 15 of the libraries together. I know it's the Strategic Library Review from 2017-18. I think it's 8.1 in this report that makes clear that that's the reason we can't look at them all together. I was very surprised that the administration, when they came in, didn't know that, considering that report was done under the previous Labour administration in 17-18. But we've thrashed that out now, it's been established. I don't know if that's what the consultant fees went on to prove that element of it, but we now know at least that's where we are. And I didn't want to go back into talking about the closures debacle. I covered it in depth last time around everything like that, but the Cabinet members commenting on social media again means I'm going to have to address it a little bit. I don't want to go on too long about it, but it needs to be made clear that not a single library closed under our previous administration, not a single library was being closed under our previous administration. And I challenge anybody, as I do it last time, point me to a public statement, press release, radio interview, or anything alike from myself as the Cabinet member responsible at the time that supported closing community managed libraries. If any of you can do it, then fine, but none of you will be able to do it because that was never the position that the previous administration was in. We increased the budget at the time to fund the transitions. I don't think that was ever changed in the Great Financial Review this administration claimed they undertook, but again, when we talk about recommendations that Cabinet refused, they refused our recommendation to provide evidence that could have supported claims around that. And looking at 3.1 in the report, when we talk about libraries being ceded back to DCC in 2022, that was one of the great decisions I think we made, because it's the only reason we can carry out anything that's being done now is the fact that libraries were ceded back to us in 2022. It was the right decision then, and I think it's proven to be that going forward. We, of course, so one thing that does concern me a little bit about this report is we've mentioned the approval that was sought in February. We've mentioned the EOI process that we've been going through. The report doesn't talk about the approval that was sought and given in February 2023, or March 2023 may have been, and the EOI process that was started at the time, that was then ended. It was endorsed by Councillor Shanker then as the leader at the time. It was walked back a few days later, and then the EOI process was cancelled about a month later as well. The report doesn't mention that, and I don't doubt that that's down to Cabinet member changes and officer changes, and of the 4 officers I dealt with mainly as a Cabinet member, 3 of them are no longer at this authority, so I'm not saying there's a cover-up or anything here or anything like that, but I think it is important that when we're telling the story that we've been on, that is referenced and mentioned in the reports that we receive, because it is an important element of the journey that libraries were on. We had an EOI process, that was stopped, we delayed a few months, then another process was started and has gone on to from there. So I do think it's important that things like that are mentioned in reports like this. Turning to the criteria contained within the reports of 4.18, I credit this is a really strong criteria base, and I am very happy to see that kind of criteria is contained within the report, and that's the kind of thing we were looking at and we were asking for. I think it's right to be talking about community hubs and community hub libraries. That was exactly what I was proposing at the time, and exactly what I wanted to see being delivered as futures for our libraries, about bringing more things into them and doing even more with the libraries and the absolute luxury of resource that we have and that they offer to us. In opposition, the now administration didn't seem very keen on that idea, but plagiarism is the best form of flattery, and I'm very glad to see that that is being something being taken forward now and an idea being taken up. And when we look at 8.2 in this report, and again looking back to the cancellation of the previous EOI process, when we would have had a process ready, I believe the date we had was the 1st of October 2023 was our deadline that were given to officers at the time, and we're now in 7th of October 2024 and we're still looking at this. I do have to question any description of what we've witnessed as the most expedient avenue available, as again I read this more as a political decision that was made at the time around the fact that because of things that have been said in an election campaign, we know the new administration couldn't bear to deliver this under the EOI that was already existing because it would have blown apart things that were said then. So the EOI was cancelled, we delayed a little bit, and a new EOI was launched. That would be my reading of the situation. Now, I don't expect officers to answer any of the points on there. They'd be happy to know. That's my reading of it, and as a member of it at Scrutiny, I couldn't sit here and not put on record my thoughts on all of this. But turning to the questions that I do have around this report. So 4.1.10 is the first bit around this, around the financing and financing going forwards. And I'm a little bit concerned about some of what I'm reading in here because my reading of it, and please correct me if I'm not right in the reading of it, is that what we're saying is that the full amount of money that would be needed to deliver all 10 CMLs is unlikely to be the amount that we give to them, or certainly we're not confirming that's the amount that we give to bidder C. So what, at this point, is the predicted funding shortfall that bidder C would have to make up in the first year of them running the libraries?
Sorry, Councillor, I was just jotting that one down. There's not an actual shortfall. I think the wording of this is that we wanted to make clear that in terms of taking the library services forward, the community libraries, that there wouldn't be 100% reliance on the local authority. The bidder has already secured funding towards the delivery should they be appointed. And this really is about the negotiation of the amount of grant available and what they would then propose to do with it.
Okay, thank you for that one. I sort of get the point around, I mean, we may end up with a shortfall if we're not providing the full amount and they can't sort of match the gap, but I accept it's not a known figure at this stage. Around sort of April 2023, one of the things being looked at for the 24-25 budget was that a guarantee that at least for the first year, if not for the second as well, the full amount would be provided in terms of allowing any future bidder to build up a bit of a surplus of funds, to be able to, one, start to afford all the additional things that we wanted to see in libraries, but also to mitigate against unexpected events. And obviously in 2020, we saw one of the most unexpected events that had a massive knock-on onto our libraries. When was the decision made sort of not to do that and to look at this setup instead?
I'm not able to directly answer that one, sorry. It's
No.
the changes in office as you
Okay, no problem at
mentioned.
all. No problem at all. In the appendix, which I'll comment a bit more on later, so financial viability at stage 1 was only scored at 20% weighted importance to DCC's aims. Yeah, obviously I've got the issues that I'm highlighting here around finance. And then at stage 2, it changed to 45%. Was that to take account of some of these issues, or was it the fact that we then narrowed down the process a bit more? What was the reason for the changing of those?
It was the narrowing down of the process. It was an evolving process that we put in place. So when we went out with EOI 1, we were still developing EOI 2 at that point. So it was just really tightening up.
Fabulous. Thinking, if we do get into a bit of a difficult scenario, and as I say, we were sort of forward planning around allowing that surplus of funds to build up. If bidder C is in the position where they can't raise the necessary funds to deliver the service as it is now, what happens?
Certainly in terms of the approved budget, there's no intention to reduce that over the years. That is there and, as I say, available then to be dispensed as a grant. Unfortunately, I just cannot kind of say what would happen in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 years financially with this. It's not one I can answer.
Okay, no problem at all. And so the final one on the finance element at this point, should we end up in that scenario, and I appreciate we can't sort of see the future in this sense, but given the powers that we're giving over to Biddisea in this, does Biddisea have the power to either permanently or temporarily close the library if there isn't the funding there to keep it open?
That will be part of the negotiation within the management agreement.
Do you know at all when we would know the answer to that question?
It will be when we hand over the library. So as I said earlier, we're aiming to have all of the libraries transferred by the end of March. The heads of term of the first agreements that we will do in terms of the leases, we hope to have those completed by the end of December. So I would say probably by the end of January we'll have the management agreements in place.
Fabulous, thank you. So turning on to 5.1, the public stakeholder engagement. There's mixed responses from different libraries and different volunteers depending on who you ask about how involved in the process they've felt. I know we're talking here about how involved they've been. Is there any sort of more information you can tell us about what the engagement with volunteers has been? So have all libraries been visited by the cabinet member and officers, or were they all invited to come into the council? What's the engagement with them been?
It was individual, primarily led by the service manager for libraries directly engaging.
Fantastic. So turning to the appendix instead, so in the evaluation process on page 2, so we're told the evaluation panel sat on the 8th and 9th of August 2024, which is a year after the previous EOI that I mentioned earlier was ended. So we're I think a year and a month after that. The evaluation panels now would have taken place in August 2023. So I appreciate things like approval weren't given until February, but what took from the cancellation of the EOI process to the panel only sitting on the 8th and 9th of August 2024? Why has this taken an additional year to get to where we would have been a year ago? What's taken the additional year?
Again, sorry, Councillor, having not been directly involved, I'm not able to answer that one.
No, but I'm saying, I know you're sort of newly having this one. I'm happy if you want to take any of these questions away and you can get me an answer from there. I certainly do understand that one. I'm happy to take any answers that aren't known now but could be sought later. I'm more than happy to take that. On the stage 1 scoring, all 3 organisations that were being looked at were scored exactly the same on each of the 3 criteria. I think there's a 1 in 27 chance of that happening, if my maths is right. Obviously, the 1 in 27 chance of all of them happening. But there's always that tendency to see every exam report as an A if you've seen the previous ones as an A. Are we certain that every one of those scored exactly the same on all 3 of the criteria?
There were a number of officers that were involved in the assessment. So we had representation from libraries, estates, legal, finance and communities. Individual scores did vary. It was more so through the moderation that we then arrived at those joint scores. I think it's fair to say as well, the expression of interest stage 1 was very much a kind of a cursory, what are your intentions, what's the direction of travel, rather than the deep dive that occurred in stage 2.
Fabulous. So turning sort of away from the appendix and the report to some more general questions on this really. So as I mentioned, the administration when it took over, and again I accept it's right to do this, but I'd still disagree with the decision, cancelled the previous EOI process that would have had the libraries ready to be taken on from around the 1st of October 2023 in favour of what we've got now. I know from one of my colleagues doing some investigating on this, 7,000 was spent on consultancy, which seems a bit of a wasted spend to me really. But the whole sort of year that we've taken on this leaves me with 2 main questions really. And the first one of those is, we heard a lot last year about the Suffolk model for libraries, about the fact the council wanted to deliver the Suffolk model for libraries. Do we think this represents the Suffolk model for libraries? As in, is this the same thing that Suffolk County Council do?
Again, I will have to come back to you on that one.
No problem at all. And the second one, again, this might be one we want to come back to, or it might be a recommendation for later. It is, as far as I can work out, we're a year and 6 days. It's round up to a year and a week of additional resource and cost, and us holding the libraries in-house that we've had to endure as an authority. Do we have a total amount that this has cost us for this delay?
Kind of the initial answer, Councillor Eyre, is that all of the costs are contained within the approved budget. And in terms of an exact figure, if that's required, that can be provided.
Fabulous, thank you, Pop. So I've got no sort of further questions for yourself, but just one other thing I feel I have to state that I'm very, very concerned about. And again, I know legal advice has been followed on this one. I know that as officers you've got no manoeuvrability around yourself doing this, but I'm deeply concerned about the fact that at this point we don't know who bidder C is. As a board, we aren't told who bidder C is in this one. And I understand that there's concerns around commercial sensitivity. I do understand that. But that's what pink papers are for, or around us being able to have that information and be trusted as elected representatives of the people of the city to have hold of that information. Yet I'm told that Cabinet don't know, the Cabinet member doesn't know, Shadow Cabinet don't know, Executive Scrutiny don't know. Not a single elected member is aware of who bidder C is, but unelected officers do know who bidder C is, or somebody knows who bidder C is, because they know who was involved in this process and the documents were submitted to them. So none of us are allowed or trusted with that information. How on earth are we expected to properly scrutinise something or Cabinet make the informed decision on things if we're not provided with names of people in this? Now, there's a number of reasons I'm really concerned, but I'll just say a few of them. We set a very dangerous precedent in this, not being able to know all the parties involved in something like this. Because when we're not allowed to know, and when it's deemed too confidential for pink papers, all of a sudden other information is not going to be in pink papers or not going to be aware to us. You know, all of a sudden it's going to be that bids for a leisure centre, if Springwood Leisure Centre does finally go up for the private sector to have their interest in, all of a sudden, why would we be able to know about that but not able to know about libraries? Golf courses, we were able to find things out about Symphony Golf Course. All of a sudden, that information, surely we don't need to be told anymore. The officers can know. Why would Cabinet and councillors need to know how to make that decision? Incinerator, we've always had pink papers when we've had the incinerator come forward, yet libraries now seems to be too confidential when the incinerator wasn't. I can't fathom how that makes logical sense for us. And then planning documents, all of a sudden we're going to have to start redacting those because they've got commercially sensitive information in them as well. So I feel we're on a slippery slope straight away with us not being able to, and really not being trusted to have that information. As we say, by Thursday we'll know, but we aren't allowed to have that information and be trusted to keep it quiet for a few days. How Cabinet are going to make the fit and proper decision by not knowing who the bidder is? How, you know, we can say based on the evidence they can make the decision, but how can they sort of stand by and endorse a decision when they don't know who the organisation is that they're going to be involved? When it comes to things like declaring an interest, how are we absolutely certain that no Cabinet member has an interest in the person, is going to make a decision on this, and then there's going to be a real issue for the Cabinet member involved who never knew that they had to do anything? So thinking of them in this situation, they're being put in a precarious decision. We also give Cabinet something to hide behind, if need be. If it turns out that the organisation involved, and again, I've no idea who the organisation is, if it turns out they've got a dodgy past or dodgy allegiances, or that the books aren't quite what we'd want them to be, or leading members of the organisation have made unacceptable statements somewhere, Cabinet and everyone can wash their hands and say, well, we didn't know who they were, we had no idea at all, and we go back into this debacle again. And I don't in any way want to impugn bidder C. How can I? I've got no idea who on earth bidder C is. But the problem is we can't properly scrutinise it, and I don't believe Cabinet can make a proper decision without that sort of information. I don't believe that we would have done something like this as the administration. I don't believe the administration in opposition would have accepted a document like this. I don't think, you know, if Symphony Golf Course had been kept quiet, I'm pretty sure that the ward councillors would have had some questions about that. Myself and my colleagues would certainly have questions if Springwood Leisure Centre comes up and we aren't given the information we feel as ward councillors we should be entitled to. And I just do not in any way see how this situation is so exceptional when you think of all the things this council does. The Cabinet members, Shadow Cabinet and Exec and all councillors are not allowed to have this information. I entirely accept it's a query for legal, but I just don't see why no elected member is to be trusted with this information. But having said that, and aside from everything else, the report is comprehensive, it sets out the processes undertaken, and I at least appreciate that it's here with us, and I credit the officers with the work that has gone into it. As I've said a dozen times in this chamber, no one wants to see any libraries close, and while I have questions over why the political decisions were made to take us down this process, which again duplicates in many ways what was already being done, at least it's happening, and we are on that route to keeping all of our libraries open. And I implore the Cabinet member and the Cabinet, take advantage of the opportunity that we've got, bring more things into our libraries, bring in new groups, bring in new events, bring in celebrations, bring in activities. Don't leave the focus solely on books. Ensure that these become true community hub libraries with lots of other things going on in them, and keep local councillors involved in that process. That is how we're going to ensure the libraries succeed in the future. And that's everything I have to say, Chair. You'll all be happy to know.
Thanks for being brief, Councillor. Pop, whilst some of those were comments from Councillor Eyre, it does still begs the question, and he raises an extremely valid point in relation to the rationale for not having pink papers. And can you just confirm it is actually the case that the Cabinet member, nor the leader or deputy leader know who the preferred bidder is?
Yeah, there's been no disclosures on this. It was, as I said earlier, it's part of the objectivity and to ensure that there was, in that respect, no political interference in approving a particular bidder.
But then how can an informed decision be taken without them knowing? Surely the Cabinet member or the leader or somebody must know, must be in a position to say. I mean, it's dealt with by way of delegation, I suppose, isn't it? One of the recommendations is the delegation to the officers to fulfil the preferred bidder going forward. So in effect, by doing that, the decision's been taken already, and the officers have decided, and the officers will bring it about. Is that the way forward for this council?
Sorry, Chair, I was about to cut across you there. And this is my reference to the original Cabinet decision in February 2024, where that delegation was made to the Strategic Director of Place. Is really the
sorry, Pop, to cut across you, but that delegation in earlier this year didn't highlight the fact that none of the Cabinet, no members in the council would know who the delegation was going to be given to.
No, that's correct. What I will do is, I'm not able to answer this other than on the back of the existing legal advice that I've been given. So first thing tomorrow morning, I can talk to Emily Feenan and Olu to clarify those points and those concerns that have been raised.
Because I mean, it's my view, and I think the majority, at least of the committee, that there should have been at least a pink paper. I'll come back to it in that a little bit. But Councillor Kay, you were quite animated in your hand there.
Yeah, I think it's appalling that there isn't a pink paper. As I mentioned earlier, I think there should be a confidential paper to go with this. I think I've been in Cabinet a long time ago. Chair, you've been in Cabinet. Other people here have as well. And you would normally, at this point, be knowing who we're talking about. And there are some times when that is important. And I think the principle of saying that you can't know until you've validated a decision makes it very difficult for us to do serious scrutiny. And that is one of the roles that we have. So I think this is a recommendation not to the Cabinet, but I think it's a recommendation to officers that Cabinet are provided with a late confidential paper which includes the identity of bidder C.
I think, Councillor Kerr, you're right. They've missed the boat with us. They can't provide us.
They can't come back to us.
But we can rightly recommend that officers, that Cabinet are provided with pink papers in relation to the preferred bidder.
Or at a minimum are provided with a more comprehensive reason for why this cannot be provided.
I'm sorry, say again.
Or at a minimum are provided with a more comprehensive reason why a confidential paper cannot be provided.
Yeah, I think that probably muddies the waters a little bit, but yes, Councillor Wright.
Chair, I'm just wondering, with respect to this, whether we have, as a council and officers, deployed the Nolan Committee principals, I feel terribly, terribly uneasy in sanctioning any decision making where I don't have the knowledge in order to make the decision. And even though we've missed the boat with respect to this committee and a much needed pink paper, I would like to see a pink paper created and to receive a retrospective copy. Thank you.
Anybody else want to come in? Yes, Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting as well, isn't it? Because I don't know, I think, well, nobody knows apart from officers, what the difference is between the information which is being kept from us and what we have in the public domain. You know, is it just literally the name of preferred bidder, or is there more detail? I suspect that there's a lot more detail there that is not being put forward. At the very least, a simple redaction of the, I don't know, the name of the organisation could be argued. I'm not saying that would be relevant in this case, but what else isn't being put before us in terms of reports? It'd be very interesting, not only, Chair, I suppose, getting to the point, is it just the name of the bidder that is being kept from us, or is there other detail which is deemed to also be confidential that elected councillors, including the executive, would not be able to see it or haven't seen it?
I take your point, Councillor Holmes, and call me cynical, or could it be as simple as something like the fact that it could well be the same preferred bidder from 2023 in 2024? And would that cause any embarrassment for the current process? But then there's me being cynical.
I think if I can, Chair, that would be a very interesting point to consider there. If we've gone through this whole process of cancelling an EOI, going through a year's process with all the costs we're going to incur, getting to now with a bidder that can't be named, and it turns out everything could have been done under the previous EOI with nothing being cancelled. I think it would be in a very, very interesting position, and Cabinet would have a lot of questions to answer if that's what we've done.
Okay, I feel the recommendation coming on in respect of pink papers being provided for Cabinet and this committee being copied in. Does somebody want to work on something there while I just follow up with it? Because we have got Alison here in terms of the costs. Unfortunately for Alison is here. In relation to the costs for this, I presume your department and possibly yourself have been kept abreast of the budgetary implications of this process, because presumably officers have had to be engaged in the running of the libraries for the past 18 months, whereas they would have been already part of an agreement and off the costs, and must presumably cost not only in relation to the expression of interest, but also the evaluation of those, and you know, any process that could have been completed a year ago and is completed now is going to incur greater cost now than it would have 12 months previously. Are you in a position to know or work out what the budgetary implications of this are, and has it been catered for in the MTFP?
So, as Pop said in answer previously, all sort of direct costs of running the libraries have been contained within the library's budget. So there's been no implications for the MTFP in terms of respect of that. I think though you're referring to probably officers' time in terms of the process it's taken to do that, and we haven't evaluated that cost because that's business as usual in terms of supporting a process which we all do various processes across, you know, the organisation anyway. So that amount hasn't been costed into this because it would be, you know, the marginal costs of you know, of us providing support to services. So no.
What I'm struggling in my mind is part of the rationale for returning and going again with CMLs was to save some costs in terms of library staff and the administration and running of libraries. And yet we've had an extra 18 months of having to, of the library service having to run the library. So there must be cost implications there in terms of loss of savings.
I suppose it depends ultimately what the final grant allocation looks like to the, to the preferred bidder. If that's lower than the current budget, then I suspect, yes, there probably will be a loss of opportunity of savings, but we don't know those figures yet.
Okay. Well, I would hope that we will know once the decision's been taken and we move into working with the provide bidder, we should be able to work out what the cost savings are and therefore work out what the cost implications have been for the last 18 months, yeah?
Yes, in terms of missed opportunities, we will, once we get to the final figure, yeah, we'll be able to do that.
Okay, have we managed to come up with a form of words in relation to a recommendation?
It's trying to get to Steve, but we have a 2-minute delay now in our email system, so countdown here. It's on its way. If I open it again, it could be delayed.
Okay, let's see if there's any other queries or inquiries in relation to this item whilst that goes through. Anything else? Okay.
If I open it again, it will
Just have to put the microphone on. Your microphone.
I'll open it again.
When we're ready, Chair, I've got to set another recommendation, but I think we'll do with Councillor Cowes first.
Okay, that Cabinet are provided with a late confidential paper which includes the identity of bidder C, or at a minimum are provided with a more comprehensive reason why a confidential paper providing this cannot be provided. Exec Scrutiny is very unhappy with the lack of transparency around this commercial decision and the wider implications that this might have. So the Cabinet are provided with a late confidential report which includes the identity of bidder C to enable them to make an informed decision.
Chair, I'm just preempting what legal might say. Should they agree that Cabinet may, remains to be seen, they may have a problem. I don't know why, but I'm just trying to think if they say the whole of the executive scrutiny receiving it, maybe the caveat should be that at the very least you should, as chair.
Sorry, if it's pink papers, the Cabinet, it should be available for all members of the Council.
Yes, absolutely.
This isn't like a sin-fin waste thing, which is super way. This should be business, normal sort of council business.
So the wording needs to be also provided to the Executive Scrutiny Board then, be clear about that, because if you say CC, it implies electronic communication. It may be there's some other way of doing it that would tick the box.
We could say a normally available late confidential paper.
Okay, Lucy, so one more time. Encore, shall we say?
The Cabinet are provided. Sorry, the Cabinet are provided with a normally available late confidential paper which includes the identity of bidder C to enable them to make an informed decision, or at a minimum are provided with a more comprehensive reason why a confidential paper providing this cannot be provided. Exec Scrutiny is very unhappy with the lack of transparency around this commercial decision and the wider implications that this might have.
Okay, I'm comfortable with that, other than to say the bit about alternatively or optionally explain yourselves a bit more. I think that gives them a bit of a get out and increases the chances of them not making... Any other views on that? Because if we suggest that or give them that option, they'll try and provide a reason and then won't tell Cabinet the name. So, any other comments on that before I go to...
Just to say, Chair, I think it perhaps needs to be emphasised that this is an unusual occurrence and that it's not usual for Cabinet members or indeed scrutiny boards for this information to be withheld. I think we just need to emphasise that it is out of the ordinary and we don't really understand why.
If you put unanimously in, and then obviously if I'm not, well, I should be there on Wednesday to present the recommendation, I can emphasise that point there, Martin, if that's okay.
So exec scrutiny is unanimously very unhappy?
Yes.
Chair,
Yes,
are you also going to add that if and when a confidential pink paper is produced, that the executive committee members also should receive a copy?
I will make it clear, Councillor Wright, that the inclusion of the words are normally prepared and presented paper, because we normally, if it would be in the normal circumstances, we would have seen it. So if they're going to issue one to Cabinet, then normally we would receive it and we expect to see it when they do on this occasion. Yeah? Okay. Okay. I think we know what we're trying to say here. I think we're unanimous on it. Is there anybody against the recommendation we're putting forward? No, let's move to a second recommendation then from Councillor Ayres.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And it pertains to the finances around this. And I certainly take Alison's point on the difficulty of calculating some of the officers' time. I think that is a difficult one. But the fact remains this has cost officer time over the last year, from having a process that was up and running to having a new process now. So the recommendation I've got, and I've had confirmation from Councillor Mulhall, he's happy to second, is that at the earliest possible opportunity, the responsible Cabinet member outlines what the total cost of the community managed library project has been from the 1st of October 2023 to the present day. This is to include the cost of running the 10 CMLs during this period, a reasonable estimation of the cost of officer time, consultancy costs, and any other costs incurred by this project during this period.
Thoughts from anybody else? Seconded by Councillor Mulhall. I think it's reasonable to want to understand what the costs have been of this delay. Any objections? No? And you can provide Stephen, or have provided with Stephen with a copy of that, Mark? Yeah? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Pop. I'm sure you'll learn a lot more about libraries in the next few months. Okay, let's move on then, because after libraries we have got, where's my list of things gone? Remind me, Stephen. Enterprise Growth Fund is next. Oh, Alison.
Thank you, Chair. Hoping this report is a little more straightforward than the previous one. So this is the DEGF, the Derby Enterprise Growth Fund, and is seeking approval to transfer some of the remaining balances of that fund into the Ascend Fund. So in November 2012, the Council secured £40 million worth of regional growth fund that funded a host of activity, including the DEGF programme, which was 20 million, and then contributed to Infinity Park Derby, and the Innovation Hub and the Business Park. So the DEGF programme was formally closed in February 2024, and as a consequence of that, there is some balances of the DEGF funds that are still available. We've been given permission to be able to carry those forward into other programme areas, providing, with the caveat that it's still to support business growth activity. So the balance of the DEGF fund is 242,000 on the revenue and 244,000 in the capital part of that programme. And the proposal in the report is to transfer both of those capital and revenue allocations to the Ascend programme, which the council currently operates and supports business growth activity. So in terms of the report is seeking recommendation for that financial transfer. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alison. Just remind me, were there any, the DEGF, does that contain any loan agreements? And some of those are presumably still being repaid. Will they go to the Ascend Fund as well?
Yes, there's still a loan book that's still outstanding. I think there's details in the report. Yeah, £336,000 worth of loans still outstanding that will transfer to the Ascend programme and will be dealt with as part. Those officers will continue to deal with that in terms of collection of those outstanding loans.
And the Ascend Fund is grants rather than loans?
It's a combination of both.
Okay. Good process, good outcomes from DEGF, and hopefully Ascend will continue that. And I presume there's still at least cabinet member or leader involvement in that process?
There is, yes, Chair.
Okay. Any other questions, queries? Yes, Councillor Kerr.
I'm pleased for that reassurance that the funding will continue to be used for loans as well as grants, because I think that I think it just makes the money go further. And if you're enabling a successful business, then it should be able to repay. What interest rate are we expecting to charge on future loans?
We use the current interest rates with an additional markup. I don't actually have the details of that, Councillor Kerr, but we don't give special rates. We do use the base
so
rate.
It's base rate plus 6% or something.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think the loans and the grants are primarily used in situations where other funding is not available by banks and things, but we tend to use the going rate, if you like.
I think this is actually something really that I wasn't aware of, and I think it's something that society isn't as aware of as it should be. We had a briefing. I'm one of the council's representatives onto the local authority pension fund, and we had a briefing there about the way in which the market's now working. And since the crash, if you're a small business and you want to get a loan, you can't just go to your ordinary bank, because the bank doesn't do those sorts of loans anymore. And that's why it's so important that we as local authority are able to be a potential source of funds. But there are others, but this makes it easier. So
that doesn't mean to say, of course, it was, well, certainly when I was involved with it, the due diligence was probably more than a bank would
due diligence is absolutely vital, but it enables us to do that instead of the bank doing it, because the banks aren't allowed to, or high street banks can't.
And we used a bank of voluntary experts in the local field to assess the applications. So very, very successful, comparatively very little unpaid loan payments and things. So, and very productive in terms of bringing business to the city. So I welcome it being continued, if not in exactly the same form. Any other questions? Yes, Martin.
Yeah, I'd just agree with what you've said, and some of us who've chaired this DEGF panel at various times over the years have actually really enjoyed it, and meeting some of the entrepreneurs locally and getting to know a bit more about their businesses and so on. It felt a bit like Dragon's Den at times, but that was part of the fun of it. But
The difference being, Martin, you're not using your own money.
No, that's that's where the other members of the panel and the expert advice came in, and the due diligence, as you say, was has proved itself to be very good by the very low level of bad debt that's surrounded it. My sort of question would be, it'd be nice to have a little bit more information now it's come to an end of the businesses that it's helped and the jobs that it's created. That information is probably sitting there relatively accessible, so might be interesting for members of this.
Has there been talk, Alison, about highlighting the outcomes of the fund in general?
Yeah, absolutely. That information's available, so I'll get the regeneration team to share that with the Scrutiny Board.
And maybe I have some comments on the subject as well. I think over the years it's been a very productive thing. Okay. Good. So we resolve to note the report on this occasion. Thank you. Moving on then, compliance contract financial procedures.
Thank you, Chair. So a few items to report this month. The first one is in relation to the Schools Capital Programme, an addition of 4 new schemes to the Capital Programme totalling £183,000, and that's primarily in relation to the childcare expansion capital grant funding. So this is where the supporting provision to expand to deliver the 30-hour free entitlement for qualifying parents and for children. The age range has been extended to from age of 9 months and to 3 years, and you can see in Appendix 1 of the report the providers that are benefiting from some of that capital grant. Central Nursery School, Harrington Nursery School, Meadow Farm Primary and Whitecross Nursery School. Project costs in total 182,000, making up a combination of schools' own devolved funding and some of the capital allocations that we've had from the DFE. In terms of the second part of the report, we've also got 2 new schemes on the capital programme for St Giles, Spencer Academy and Borrowwood, and that's in relation to the SEND and alternative provision capital allocation. So we've got around £16 million worth of capital monies to support improvement in relation to our sufficiency and offer in the special educational needs and disability space. And we've got 2 programmes here. One is at, as I said, St Giles' special school, 229,000. That's to improve facilities already there, for fully equipped occupational therapy room, an upgrade of a dark room and a new sensory room. And then at Borrowwood Primary, this is a scheme of £329,000, and that's the remodelling of vacant classrooms, toilets and underutilised spaces in the school for the creation of an enhanced resource provision, so an ERP, to provide additional support to children with special educational needs alongside mainstream children. We then, as associated with that, we do have a delegated approval to enter into some grant agreements with Odyssey Academy Trust for the works at Borrowwood Primary. So Borrowwood Primary will be responsible for the operation and delivery of that particular capital programme works. We won't be doing it as a council, so we need to enter into a grant agreement with the school to allow us to discharge those responsibilities and allow the funding to flow. In the report also details at 4.4 the extension of the Household Support Fund. So this is the 6th wave of the Household Support Fund, which has been extended to run from the 1st of October to the end of March 2025. I think you'll probably all be familiar with the HSF, as it is in its 6th round in terms of what it does and what it supports. The focus of the round 6 will be following sort of the ethos of previous allocations. So we'll be allocating food vouchers to all schools in Derby for pupils eligible for free school meals. There'll be an application-based online form for residents to apply for financial help towards food and energy costs. continuation of the community-led approach for the warm welcome hubs over the winter period. And then it supports essential items for families in financial crisis, including support for eligible pensioners as well. So we've been at an allocation of £2.225 million for the final 6 months of this financial year. The report does detail also a quotation from the DWP, who've carried out an audit of the council's HSF programme, and its positive reflections on how the council's operated that and the impact that that's had on our vulnerable residents in Derby. So that's really good that we've had that feedback from them in terms of how we've been running this programme over the course of the last few years. So there's a recommendation in the report to delegate authority for the approval and implementation of the HSF 6 round to the Strategic Director of People and the 151 officer and the Cabinet member to discharge those responsibilities with that grant. Thank you.
Questions, comments for Alison? Yes, Councillor Kerr.
Just on the grants, it would be really nice if we didn't have people in our communities who needed to fall back on this, but sadly we're not in that situation. So I'm really I am relieved that the money is being offered again. I just wanted to know what an eligible pensioner is.
I think that's in relation to the received benefits. So it's pension support credits, those sort of things. So they're means tested.
No, I won't say. Thanks, Alison. Okay, that leaves us with one confidential short item to go through. Where's my spiel, Stephen?
Bring it up on the chair.
I thought I got it here ready, but I haven't.
That's all right, put it up with it. Here you go, Chair. There you go.
Yeah, the recommendation is the exclusion of the press and public, to consider a resolution to exclude the press and public during consideration of the following item under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972. The press and public be excluded from the meeting during discussion of the following items on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Are we agreed?